Thank you to all of you for being here this afternoon, coming out on a Sunday. It means so much to see you here as we enter into the final week of JoeSam's exhibition Text Messages. It's been a homecoming for me and a homecoming for him, and a moment that I think we'll always treasure in being able to present his work in MoAD, which has been the home for so many artists of African descent throughout the years. JoeSam speaks a very specific language, a dialect of collage, assemblage, spoken by Southern artists such as John Scott and Thornton Dial, and West Coast artists such as Noah Purifoy and John Otterbridge. Both texture and stenciled spray paint are at play in the series of paintings in this exhibition. JoeSam was based in San Francisco for about 4 decades, and the residue of the San Francisco streets are present within these works. I wanted to think about today, not just JoeSam's relationship to the streets of San Francisco and to the Bay Area, but to the community of artists, many of whom are here with us today. I want to acknowledge Mildred Howard and Louis Watts, who are also here. So many of the artists that I know he was able to present and share space with at the Navy shipyard over the years. And of course, Oliver and Dewey are a part of my thinking around JoeSam's canonization. And that's part of why it was so important for us to do this exhibition, was to really think about the categories of abstraction and figuration and the things that are the slippages, the spaces in between. So when I think about abstraction in the Bay Area, I think about Mary Lovelace O'Neill and Joe Overstreet and Robert Colescott and Raymond Saunders and Arthur Monroe and Suzanne Jackson. And at the time, I also think about the writers who were here, a young Bell Hooks, Ishmael Reed, Bob Kaufman, June Jordan. I'm thinking about the musicians who were here. And so I think in this moment of the late 70s, the early 80s, the 90s, we're thinking about not just JoeSam's production, but a series of artists who are producing bodies of works that are responding to the moment. And so I want to begin by asking you, on the heels of what was the closure of the Black Panther Party in the late 70s and early 80s, what was the political context at the time in the Bay Area in San Francisco? When did you guys meet JoeSam? And JoeSam, for you, what were you responding to in the moment in the late 80s and early 90s as you began producing this body of work?
Well, believe it or not, I've known these old dogs for a long time. Hello, Mildred and my captain. He's still hanging in there. Hey, Dewey, it's all right. It's all right. Hey, listen.
Nice to see you, man.
Yeah, well, we still standing, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I understand.
Hey, listen, you know, one of the things I was thinking about the other day is when I first got to California on sabbatical from Amherst, this city was rough. You know, this was no joke being in San Francisco. And I was blown away by the people who were in the art world, who were mostly in the East Bay. It never dawned on me in retrospect when I go back and look at some of the things I've been involved in all along. But I ironically came here to deal with social issues and put a lot of programs back together in San Francisco. So it just still blows me away that for some reason, people don't understand how rough and ready San Francisco was in the early 70s on into the late 60s. And I'm talking about serious. So if you wanted to be cognizant of that effort, then you need to be aware of what was going on in the various communities in San Francisco, like the Bayview, Hunters Point, and etc. And I mean serious stuff. We're not talking about just joking around mess. I'm talking about serious community involvement and concern about a lot of things. And one of the things I always wanted to do as an artist, even though I studied other things, was my love for mixed media and to find supplies and situations that I would be applicable to my art. Well, San Francisco was a gold mine, as my daughter would tell you. She used to go a dumpster riding with me. But anyway, that's the thing that really started my mentality around creating art. I always was an artist. I've had involvement in art for a long time. And when I decided to really pursue it, I had to resign from about 3 or 4 boards in San Francisco. And one of them was the General Hospital Board, which I visited when I was back recently. I was blown away. We were trying to get that whole hospital built again. And I was on the board for about 10 years in San Francisco General. And then when I saw it about a couple of weeks ago, my mind was blown. So I don't think I wasted time on my art. I think I just, put it aside for a minute, because I've literally been all the way around the world in the last 15, 20 years. And that's the genesis of me, and I've been involved in so many crazy things, but very political in many ways. So that's why it wouldn't be such a jump for me to jump from painting trees and etc. to just dealing with political issues.
Oliver?
What?
It's gonna be a rough night, I know.
Captain.
I was listening to, it's wonderful for me to hear him talk about his own development, So, again, I'm so pleased to see you, man. I want to say that again. I haven't talked to you for a long time. Last time
we were on a bus ride in Paris somewhere.
Yes.
Captain.
But anyway, I really like the work that I've seen. I hadn't seen any work like this before. It's wonderful. I really like it, okay?
They did an extraordinary job.
And I like the variety and the approach and the richness of the work. Very, very rich in physicality. And my aesthetic response is the intimacy at the same time. They're very intimate works, and not just, not just dealing with the subject matter, but there's an intimacy in terms of my experience with the work. All right? So I want you to know how wonderful I think they are. They're very challenging in terms of experiencing them. So thank you for your aesthetic. All right, that's number one. Now, what was the question? There was another question.
When did you all first meet, and what was the moment at the time? What was the vibe at the time?
Ask Dewey. Dewey set that up.
You made the intro, Dewey?
Yes, Dewey, yes.
Well, it'll take a moment, but I'll try to be brief. I met.
Try to be brief.
No, I'm gonna be very brief.
Kidding, man.
I was painting a mural in the Western Addition, and this was when did you come here, Joe?
It had to be around the late 70s, I think.
Yeah, because I was working on this thing, and you were the director of some kind of organization, and you had an office over in Polk Street or somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I came into your office because a group of artists asked me to come, and I looked at your office, and I said, man, this cat has a who is this? Because I said, this brother's aesthetic is really correct, and that made me want to know who you were, because I'd been in offices before, but they didn't look like your office. So we got together after that, and I came to your house, and I found that you were actually an artist, and through that we became friends, and I introduced you to some other people that you didn't know, but and I think we met Oliver in the 80s.
Yeah.
Right, because so I think that's the way that went.
You're traveling to Paris. We
Now
met the cat.
that was in the 90s.
That was
We're right in the 90s. It's all
That was in the 90s, man. Ray put that together, and we'll get to that because that's something else. That's a whole nother thing.
You know what? I don't even think we need to wait. We don't want to keep the people
Well,
waiting. So I'll ask the question and we'll get right into it.
Okay.
So each of you have traveled extensively throughout South America, throughout Europe, and throughout Africa. All of your works reference that somehow. I have heard the legendary stories of Paris, a place that I spend a lot of time, and I'm really, really thrilled that you're each happy to talk about that today. So let's get into the Paris trip, but I would love for us to also circle back to Africa, to Brazil, to Cuba, to think about the notion of the African continuum that you introduced, Oliver, and to think about the ways in which all of this work relates to the idea of the African diaspora.
Well, we're here. That's it right there. No, I'm serious. And the continuum simply means what it says, is that it's not broken. The sensibility is not broken. It's continuum. The history from the European standpoint is that it's broken, but it's simply not. It's obvious in the original products that in all these different places where Africans have been taken, they have created unique forms of expression. So that's the continuum. And the sensibility is a foot in the world, in the story. And it will always be as long as they're African people. It's like any other sensibility, it's alive and well under the pressures of life. And that includes all the pressures. I'm trying to be nice about the pressures. that makes sense to you? Does it make sense to you?
It makes perfect sense to me. I think you've talked about this notion of listening to the undertone. And Dewey, you talk about it as the hum and a series of echoes that go between these various spaces of diaspora, whether it's the US or Africa itself, Cuba, Brazil. Can you talk a little bit about how that notion of the hum is present within the work and relates to the continuum? And then we'll go right to Paris. JoeSam, I swear.
Well, one of the aspects of this is energy flows that I think happen in relationship to both the sonic and the visual. And you grow up in both those contexts, and your physical being is sort of pulling all that energy inside yourself. And when you grow up in a family that goes into a kind of sacred church space, it prepares you for what you're about to face outside of that space. And the life continues to develop through it. So when you start making stuff, you try to pull those energies into that experience, and they move in different registers in different contexts, and they draw you to forces that will help you articulate that relationship. And so you wind up encountering individuals that help you to center yourself. And it's an ongoing process. And that hum that you've been trained through that process in those churches to center your body so that you get equipped, not just at that moment, but the sonic relationship is recomposing from a child the energy you need to confront this thing that Oliver pointed out, being nice about it. And so in that way, when you start making, you pull those from those forces, and they happen in different ways. And they do not happen in a linear context. That's the main thing. is that we don't shape our responses through a linear protocol, so they may go in any direction.
Thank
Yes.
you. JoeSam?
Yeah, Dewey and Oliver, one of the things that fascinated me about meeting all these monsters, so we had the Fruit of the Loom out there in Paris, the Jake and all that bunch. But the thing that fascinated me, Dewey, is I went to see one of your shows, I don't know when it was. And I had always in my mind what Dewey, Crumpler, Jack, you guys did, Mildred and everybody. But one day I went to, I think it was, what the hell is the name of the place? In the Richmond Art Center, I think. And you had painted these ship containers. I was in that place for an hour looking at these nothing but ship containers, And I was wondering what made Dewey go there. How did he even get in his brain to go there when he's so used to doing what I perceive as, more third world orientated stuff. And man, there's something about it. I was watching those damn things like they were moving up and down the Bay Area, And I said, wow, it's funny how people can change and evolve into another direction, but yet still keep the continuity of what they were from the beginning. We all evolve and we all change up and we all act up. But to make a shift in the visual plane and still have the same continuity of what you are, I think that's extraordinary to me, That's why I like mixed media. If you find a bottle cap, step on it and put it in the painting. But, and that's what I loved about art, is to be able to create from anything. I mean, I literally lived in the dumpsters in San Francisco and used to drag my daughter with me, and she hated it.
You won't stop talking about it either.
I know. Dad, Mom, come get it. He's in the garbage across the street. I remember those days. There was something. But anyway, that's the fascinating thing that we did when we were in Paris. And it's, Jacob, all of us was there. Remember? We made, I don't know how many trips. But boy, oh boy, I enjoyed that trip better than some of the others I've been in. I've been in China, Japan, Philippines, you name it, Russia, and all that kind of stuff for months at a clip. So it's interesting. I've seen some changes.
Well, Paris, we had a chance to get together, and many times Paris is an interesting place where a cosmopolitan city where different people from different places come and are able in Paris to get together in ways, Mildred, myself, Dewey, you, Raymond, that we couldn't in the United States. And being able to be open without pressure, without Americana hanging over your head and monitoring. And by that I mean is...
Exactly.
So in Paris, because it's a city of love, and it is lovely, but it's also available in that way, and it's got its problems, not perfect, but the racism in Paris is totally different than it is in the United States, and it permits beauty among all people. It recognizes that, and it doesn't play that down, and there are opportunities to express yourself, like Josephine Baker there, which is impossible, and she's from St. Louis, and I'm from St. Louis, and I know what I'm talking about. In Paris, it's a chance that your capacity as a human being, regardless of the color of your skin, is appreciated in terms of what you can do as a human being. That's unique pretty much in Paris, and that's why not only African Americans come, but people from all over the world, Africa, Japan, find in Paris an openness to their sensibility, And that's rather wonderful. So in Paris, we had a great time. Remember all that food we were eating? Listen, that wine, we were drinking a lot of wine. That's the truth. Enjoying it. Remember every night we used to get together, Joe, on the steps and sing.
Yeah.
Now I can tell you, this is between him, this is my partner. One early morning, I was walking. We were singing all that.
Yeah, all
You know,
day.
remember that?
It is.
We'd be drunk and singing. And then,
The best wine.
there I go, there I go, there I go, there I go. Those kind of things. And it was
And our host was
joyful.
Raymond Saunders.
Huh?
You know?
Say
And
that?
our host was Raymond Saunders.
Yes, it was.
He liked to,
Well, he
he,
was-
he
he
loved to bring it anyway.
He had
you
the
know.
house.
Yes, well, we shaped Raymond up a bit. You know, he drank a little more wine than usual. Yeah.
Well, you know,
Leave it
since
there.
we're singing, I wonder if we can move to one of the other subjects that's something
Sure.
shared. You get to sing again if you'd like to. I'd love to have you keep singing. But this notion of the hum, the echo, the relationship between African music, spirituality, and painting itself. Each one of you have had collaborations with musicians at some point or another in your career. For JoeSam, obviously, we're aware of the album covers that you made and your ongoing relationship with Bobby McFerrin. For you, Oliver, that was an ongoing kind of set of responses to in relationship with Julius Hemphill. But I'd love to think about how this notion of the sonic and this notion of how you sang and danced in the streets plays itself out when you think about this blues series, JoeSam, or this jazz series, many pieces of which I'm looking still for. I don't know what's in Paris, or they may be all over the world, but really that idea that you paid homage to and often named musicians in these paintings, whether it was Miles Davis or Coltrane. Those letters, those names are called out within these works. And I was interested in thinking about how you met Max Roach, since we know you met Max Roach, and again, how you met Julius Hemphill, and
Max Roach, too.
well, I want to know who all y'all met. I'm interested in what were the spots, and when did you go and listen to music? And tell us, please tell us.
Well, I was born and raised in Harlem. And in my older years, I used to hang out at a place called Slugs in the
Yeah.
village. And next door to it, a fried chicken joint. And that's where, God, who got shot and killed in there one night? I was down there. But this is not when Miles Davis got smacked upside the head uptown in Birdland.
I
But
was
we
going to
all
ask about Miles, too.
used to hang out there, and all the jazz musicians on the planet, from Bobby, he was still the younger of the bunch at the time, but we used to all go there. It was Harlem at its finest at the bottom of the city, and it was in the village. And I lived in a cold water flat in the village, trying to make it. I didn't, as young me, what's his name? B.S. Cat was one of them young blood that was coming hard. But nevertheless, you had to be into jazz. I don't know how anyone could figure how to do art about people of color, especially because I played timbales and conga in college. So I was always loving Latin music. And I used to go to, oh God, the Palladium up in East Harlem. And we used to play music all day. And I never, ever, I don't think, remember ever painting anything or creating anything without music. Someone asked me that, do you, yes, I can't even think without music playing in the back.
And Oliver, the one couple of times I've been in your studio, you were playing music at the time. For you?
Well, I think from what Dewey says and what he says, is that there is in the African traditional culture, there's no separation in music as communication and the visual as communication. The thing about them is they don't use words, which means things that cannot be expressed in language, which tends to be linear in the way it's constructed and its grammar, does not allow for a kind of knowing and communication, in that media. In the visual media as well as the sound music media, you can be precise in communication by resonating the person experientially, personally, and also generally as a group, and immediate. And the two forms are appropriate. You have eyes, you have ears, and the total resonation shapes you. If you want to call a cultural shaping in China, they don't make spirituals. Not that the sensibility about music is not deep. Their sensibility hears the sound differently that resonates them. It's just as profound in terms of moving them. In Africa, the sense of sound was coming up in the neighborhood, a diaspora context in St. Louis. It resonates you as a means of communicating. The visual thing, the way you dress, is communication. You're speaking spiritually. You're talking to an individual from the general sensibility that is personal, but it was developed by being in a community and being resonated by sound and sight and aesthetics. The aesthetic milieu is just perfect for speaking to one spiritually. And both sound and sight bring into our bodies vibrations that are incredible. When I said I love this work, it's doing something to me. Not just what it is meant to speak clearly and what it deals with clearly, but more than that, it's put forth in a particular way, it's composed in a particular way that has a sensibility to it. The passages, breaks, nuances, that's all informed, it seems to me, by both sound and sight, and they're not divided so much as the sound. Just they're not, I don't know how you can separate them in a developed, yes, it's just, you live in a context, you're from a group of people, they like to hear sounds this way, we like to speak in a certain way. That's the sensibility at play. That's why the continuum goes on in the so-called diaspora in the story.
Well,
what?
I'm trying to grasp what you just said. You know,
Hard? Was it that?
it was.
These two who sat up with Sadia Hartman and had conversations in the studio about vibration and quantum physics. Come on.
Well, you know, Oliver, you know, Oliver's always throwing shit in the air, you know, and then.
I know what was left out.
Yeah. But anyway, I forgot what.
Well, we're talking about, you know, I was just trying to speak to.
No, I remember what you said.
Oh.
I forgot what I was.
You know what? Don't worry about it. We can proceed to think about the next element of this, which is to kind of. Oh, okay. There it was. There it was.
Let me just say that we on our way over here, Oliver was directing Beethoven, and we were, you know, you have to have music. If you don't have music, if you don't get vibrated up in here, you in trouble.
But you remember, what's this business about Beethoven? This European, supposedly a black guy.
Oh.
Most people don't know that. But anyway, I just threw that out there. Don't get nervous. Don't get nervous. People get nervous.
Some of us
But
knew.
the thing about it is, what was it is that it really speaks. It's powerful. For me, I'm sure for you, we plan it because
yes, indeed.
not only is it churchy, but it means spiritually. I mean, he'd be jumping up in your chest, and not. I mean, just.
But the point you made about China or India or wherever it is, the sonic dynamic is what that's how you get shaped up in here. You need this visual context to settle. For example, this music. I was trained by, you know, in European making, and I loved every moment of it. But I was really trained by musicians. It was musicians that helped me understand what abstraction was. And I don't even think there's a thing called abstraction. That's just some shit they put together to divide stuff, to run it in a particular way. The point is, this idea, the point is, in this space that reshapes and articulates, that's how you orient yourself. And those musicians were complicated. And the complication meant they came on their terms, not your terms. They weren't trying they saw something, they went for it. Once you went to it, you became a different person. When I saw Joe's work in his office, I was resonated by that experience. And that meant I have to know him. When I saw Oliver's work in the Museum of Modern Art, I didn't even know him. I didn't know he was a Blood, because they didn't show black folks work in that museum, hardly ever. So I just assumed he was
A white boy.
There you go. And then I saw this work. Well, let me just say one little quick thing in reference to change. But I had graduated because, as I told you, I didn't know my man. The same thing with Joe. I got to know Joe, and it was immediate. I could feel New York in him. I could feel the sophistication in him. He was huge, not small. That's important. He could operate in any context. That was deeply important. Then when I saw that work, I said, this is work. I got to know this person. And then I wound up in a show that Alan Gordon put together about black artists that was shown up in New York. New York, Sacramento, and at the Corcoran. And I was in it, and I saw this work, and I said, God damn, who is this? And I looked and said, Oliver Jackson, he a Blood? Now, my point was, I said, oh, and the same thing when I met him. Through the work, that's how you come to a particular process of connection. And that connection ran deep because I could see that I could talk to a person about anything with Joe, and I could talk to Oliver about anything. I could talk every now and then with Oliver about everything because Oliver started going. And then, but these are brilliant, wonderful moments. They're the things that help shape you. I've known Oliver since the 80s. I've known Joe since the 70s. I've known Mildred since 72 or something. And Mildred, I saw Mildred's work, and I was just moving away from just dialoguing and muralism, and I saw Mildred's work was all diffused and weird, and I said, God. So my point is, these forces come together because they're meant to do so. You can't be in the same hemisphere and not be drawn to these powers because you've been articulated to move in that direction. And so that's how we were able to hook up, and through all those things, we were able to roll together. I didn't talk about Paris, but me and Joe in Paris, and Oliver.
Head down.
That in Paris, on the Seine, absolutely in every, at nighttime.
Oh, Lord.
In the daytime.
Oh, Lord.
On the boat, in the, in the park.
Free at last.
It just was ridiculous that unbelievable cheese, wine, bread, everything. I said, oh man, I'm coming back here every year.
Oh, Lord.
So we had a moment. We went to Amsterdam together.
Uh-oh.
We went to Amsterdam. We went to see
Yes.
that freak named Rembrandt
I was
and that
so
other freak named Van Gogh.
okay.
And we walked through a tunnel.
That's it.
And when we went in that tunnel, we were one person. And when we came out of that tunnel, these people were playing inside this vessel. They were playing Beethoven
That's right.
with strings. It was horribly wonderful. And in that moment,
Tears, man.
I was captured, and I began to cry. And I looked over at Oliver, and he was all messed up, crying too. And we came out of there because we had been worked. We had been worked by the sonic property, and we had been worked by the visual property. And together, they created a new set of human beings. That's what being outside of madness can bring. And I was able to do that with this freak and that freak. And for that, I'm greatly appreciative. And we were all brought together by a true freak named Raymond Saunders.
Let me add this. I think it's important to clarify just a bit what I mean by sensibility. Sensibility shows itself individually. It's in this work on the wall. The African sensibility shows, but it is not something that could be summed up in 3-4 statements. You only understand it as it creates, and its particularity is clear. But it's not predictable from what has been, even though it will be traces within it. So that hip-hop is not predictable until it comes. And then everybody makes up how it got there. But it comes up out of a sensibility that's under certain pressures in these major cities, particularly New York. And this response was an African sensibility response from individuals. And it then spoke to large numbers of human beings because at its base was what was available to any human being. But the use of the context was managed aesthetically by the African sensibility. And you get hip hop. Blues, that's how you get it. Individuals, Bobby Blues, Bob Bland, you can name them, BB. Each one has a voice and it expands the sensibility as it will always be expanded as long as there's African people who absorb the context through their sensibility. That's true for Jewish people and everybody else. And that's the uniqueness, and is wonderful because it's available to any human being who wishes to take the time, open their ears and eyes to it without prejudice. It's your choice. It's not, nothing about these works require you to like them. That's your business. But if you stand before them, you cannot help but be experience the sensibility. You don't have to like it, but you will experience it. Your eyes will do it better than your perception. Your perception is full of prejudice. It's fine, that's cool, all of us. But your eyes are not, they see. And they bring into the body more than can be accounted for in the brain. So music does the same thing. And if one is a little patient, that is returning again and again, it might change your perception to equal what has already been absorbed in the experience. I'll leave it there. Joe.
You know, I've got to say that part of the reason I'm so honored to be in conversation with the three of you today is that you demonstrated this relationship between art power and politics. Pablo Picasso, one of those freaks that I'm sure you saw quite often, the work in Paris, and his work, Guernica, embedded in Guernica is the text, "Painting is not made to decorate apartments." To that notion, you don't have to like it. It is an offensive and defensive weapon against the enemy, i.e., it is an instrument of war. And so I wanted to think about, in your Sharpeville series, in your post-Atlantic series, JoeSam, in almost all of the work present here, we have a response to systemic violence, to racism, to these forms of prejudices that you've mentioned, but to police brutality, to colonial occupation, to segregation, to apartheid in South Africa. And I wanted to think about the ways in which, JoeSam, particularly you have embedded in these works, and we see throughout your works, these notions of a man in chains standing on the auction block, the red splotches that reference bullet wounds, bullets themselves in empty bottles, and then even the target, the notion of the target on the black man's back, to this notion of how one wants the audience to respond or anticipates a response from an audience. I know that you spent a great deal of time in education, as did you, Dewey, and this notion of how the work is meant to resonate with these emblems and icons embedded within it. Can you speak to that for a moment, this notion of the work as a response to political aggression?
Yes. First of all, I'm obsessive with found objects. Now, what I mean about found objects, anything that I find on the ground, I love it after it rains, because things that when it rains, it does something to material. And when it's wet, you know, it illuminates itself. So if I can be walking down the street, whether I'm in a suit going to a board meeting, or whether I see I see a bottle cap, I freak out if it's bent just the right way. And I was obsessed with that, and I always did that in my work. But somewhere along the line, I said I have to educate somewhere in my work that will be unique for young people to get attracted to. I'm crazy about working with young people. I have since I've been out of college or in college, and I've studied to become a child psychologist. But the point is, I love mixed media in the sense that you can do anything you want with it. And I got a rude awakening about that. One day, we weren't in Paris. Maybe we were with Raymond Saunders, who was our so-called leader of the bunch. The professor was leading this particular trip. And he had on a cardigan sweater. You know those old big, heavy wool sweaters that you in high school? And I looked up, and he had a big 8, you know, like the numbers that you put on your uniform or something, sewn into the jacket just on the side here. Then he had a big S over here. I said, what is that? Are you crazy? That's not supposed to be on that sweater. And he said, why not? And I looked at him and I said, oh shit, why not? It doesn't make any sense. And then he went somewhere and pulled out another shirt with a Q on it. And it was just there. He said, yeah. And I said, Raymond, that looks a little weird, don't you think? He said, no. And I got to really love and seeing it. I look for that. So even some of my work today, you'll see a number like 6, 2, E, something. drive me crazy about that. Why is that 8 on that painting, JoeSam? Why is that foot on the painting? I said, I don't know. It came to me that was represented of the piece in the show that I have that had a strong impact on me, the shooting those sisters in the church. You know, can you visualize a white boy just out of his teens going into a black church down there, and he walks in there with a gun in a bag, you know, a gun bag, and he sits down with them, and they thought he's just another white boy, got off track a little bit, let him come on in and sit down and read the Bible with us. And these are old sisters, you know, a couple of brothers. And this chump stepped up after praying with these people and shot 7 of them, I think it was. Boy, that I still can't get over that. And he got up, and the last sister that was still alive, he was going to shoot. But he decided not to shoot, and he told her that I'm not going to kill you because I want you to be able to tell what happened here. Got up and went on out there. That's that little piece that you see in the back there. Yeah, it was unbelievable. And it still has a tremendous, and we've seen some weird stuff happening. And you have to be very careful when you get too dramatic about stuff, because that thing also bothered me. I was that young girl who got shot, and everybody raised hell. But you can't be too, what should I say? I need fun and humor in my work too. And that's the thing that I'm always amazed about, is how young kids see my work. I don't care where I am in the world. I've done children's books, award-winning books, and Chris got King Award 2 years ago and won some award. I'm supposed to go to Washington in November to get, I forgot what it's called, all these super awards. But I remember the kid. There's a photograph of this kid looking at a JoeSam big painting. He had his arms crossed. And I swear it wasn't in Cheryl Haynes' gallery. I forgot, maybe a Bonnie's gallery. But I remember this kid was standing in there with a style. He had to be about 7 or 8 years old. And he's looking up at this JoeSam painting. And I swear on my daughter, he looked up there and he kept looking around. And I'm over here talking to 10 other people in the opening. And I said, and I can hear, you know, he's by himself with his arms crossed. And he's looking up at this JoeSam craziness as far as he can. And he said, who did this shit? And I was way across the gallery and I heard him as clear as a bell. That's how artists' brains work, you know? And I said, wait a minute. I said to the people, excuse me, I'm going on, let me speak to this young man. I walked over there to him. I said, hey man, you like this painting? He said, no, what is it? It's crazy. I said, no, I don't think so. If you look at it, and I'm explaining to him, and all he's trying to say is, JoeSam, you know, who did this shit? I said, oh my goodness gracious. And that's when you realize, first of all, young people don't mess around when the young kids got a ran a federal program for the city and the county for 10 years at San Francisco, Head Start, and women centers and stuff like that. But I remember that kid to this day, and a photographer took a picture of him looking at that painting. So I got a big newspaper article from Merced, I think San Jose Merced, and the kid sitting there looking at that painting. What is this? And I said to myself, wow, that's amazing, extraordinary. And he was a great kid. And he didn't pull back either. He said, I don't know anything about cows. I did the Black West series. I had some cows in it. He said, what is that? It's cow. Ain't no cows in Hartford. Boy, I love that kind of response from people, especially young kids. And I've done a series of works on kids. I remember, you never know where work comes from. I was talking to this elementary school teacher at a show I had at somewhere in Hartford. And I remember the school teacher was in there. And I said, wow, you can't even pronounce these names. Yolanda, Yokotukla, Papalipi, and Susili. I said, God, where did they get these names from? Because they're black kids in the school. And man, she said, look, come in my school on Monday and come to my class, and I'm gonna show you some names. I went to meet her at her class, and I went in and she said, look at and she opened up the roll book. G Sinai, Kolatopa, Amalepe. And he said, what are these names? And what they are African names. that we so used to Eurocentric names, and I couldn't stop laughing. So I did a body of work, about 30 paintings, looking through the children's eyes. Yeah, they all sold out, but they're beautiful paintings of just random kids. And I love that body of work. But anyway, I think music, I've always had it. God knows, I was raised by 4 wild ants up in Harlem, and music was 24/7. Apollo wasn't that far. So we used to go there all the time on a Saturday afternoon. But the Black West series came from something I saw and was tired of seeing, the Lone Ranger and shit like that. So I thought I'd dress it up and make it mixed media. And ironically enough, I submitted it somewhere, I think in Marin City or something. It won the National Endowment, 30 grand. I thought that was cool. Rent free too. And fortunately, I've been able to take this stuff around the planet. And the best place, not the best, one of the fortunate places which I thought I wouldn't be interested in was China. I went there twice. And I walked on the Great Wall, got great pictures of me in that tomb where all the soldiers are made out of brass and bronze. And that was eerie to be down in there. But and the Great Wall was fascinating. When you branch out and go to different places, your brain keeps moving, trying to catch up with what you're seeing in front of you, especially when you've never seen it before. And that's what happened to me when I was in the Philippines. They got these little funny little cars called jitneys. And I remember Don and I came from the airport and jumped in this first little, it looked like, I don't know what you described, it looked like a little motorcycle. And we drove to that fancy hotel, and we walked down to get us a drink after that long trip. And I turned around and looked at the hallway, and there were footprints all the way from the outside into the hall. And that was Don and I. We had stepped in a recently painted jitney, they call them, with all the bright colors. And he wanted to give us a ride so bad, he didn't wait till the damn thing dried. And so the hotel management went crazy. That they could follow us because they saw our footprints going from the front door to the first bar. I'll never forget that. But there's been interesting situations as an artist, and I must admit, I was mesmerized by Brazil and Salvador Bahia. And I got some great concepts and ideas from being there for those 8 to 10 months, right on the ocean. In Salvador, what a place. And the music and the drums, I can listen to them all day long, which I did outside my studio on the ocean. It was fabulous. And I hope that one day, if I'm still kicking around, is to track down Raymond Saunders. Not Ray, but what's his name? Who built that thing up there in Africa. Jesus Christ, did you see that? Akinde Wale.
Oh, in Dakar, yeah.
Yeah, that thing. Ooh, my gracious. I'm gonna send out my application. I haven't gone to just about everyone there is on the planet, but I really.
I'll take that trip with you, JoeSam.
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's cold-blooded. And to thank Dewey when we met him. Remember?
Yeah.
He had, JoeSam, you got to come see my work. I said, yes, son, when I get a minute. You know, we're going to Paris, going to be running around. When I get back, I swear. And then I got back, and some kid said, that, no, look, Donna, this kid keeps calling the house. Joe, you're supposed to go see his work. I said, well, you know, I will. I'm not Dewey and Oliver, these professors here. So I did go finally to see his work. And that's what and I looked up.
One of his paintings.
Yeah, and I looked. I went in there.
Had the.
He said, let me show you my work. And he took me in the back. He had cubby holes, remember? You know, and I went up there and I saw the work. I said, holy smokes. Did you just do this big monster? I said, yeah. No way. He said, yes. And then I know another artist named, he went to the Art Institute too, and he quit because he didn't like the racism there too. I thought that was weird, but that was true. And he's a monster painter too. Eurocentric stuff, but oh man. And he said to me, he said, you know, I said, what happened? And he said, somebody cut up my painting. I guess it means cut your painting. He said, look. And I looked up and somebody sliced painting, that big ass painting with an X-Acto knife. I said, holy shit, who did that? He said, I don't know, because, and I said, well, I don't know, I'm going to, and there was a woman who was the director at the time, I think she committed suicide or something, at the Art Institute. Dewey, who was that woman?
She was at the MCA and her name
Yes,
was,
she was something.
yeah,
I remember going up to talk to her about how come
Carolyn.
you check these kids' work and that. She said, Joe, there's no way we can monitor that.
Carrie did a painting of her.
And anyway, I remember him saying, my dad is an African. He's an African, and I want to go see him for it goes. I said, well, Jesus Christ, son, how about getting you to show me one of these paintings? Right. This is a monster. He said, yeah, if you write a recommendation for me to go to Yale. I said, all right, I'll screw you. Write it out and I'll sign my name to it. Take it on down there. And since then, I saw him recently up at the new school. He was walking out with, he had 6 dogs. 6 dogs. I said, oh my God, that shows you. But he is a master, as far as I'm concerned, getting that right color system. But yeah, you a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you going down this lineage of how you have had these relationships with many artists, including Kehinde. I've seen that work. It's a very early work, and to recognize Kehinde's talent in that moment is truly extraordinary. Just before we wrap up, I want to kind of end this political question by thinking again about the relationship between your practices. You know, I'd love for you to talk about the Sharpeville series and your response to South Africa. But in thinking about Youth Dewey, I want to go to your iconic hoodie series and think about this notion of presence and absence. You know, we've talked about abstraction versus figuration, and to think about the violence towards the Black body, but to fully absent that Black body and to have us evoke these traumas without feeling traumatized, I think is a really unique aspect of that series. So can you speak about that and why that series has been so important to your practice?
Africa, as a younger person, I started to study African cosmology and African philosophical thought. I listened to Malcolm, and Malcolm said, you left your mind in Africa, and I was trying to understand what that meant in a kind of recovery. And of course, over time, that was very important. So one of the things about African making that began to really get to me was, and my attraction to it, was that it was like music. It wasn't trapped in an attempt to create a specific moment in time in a kind of realism. And at that time, I was really involved in realism. But in the African context, you know, they live in the soup of themselves, so they don't have a Black problem, because that's, you know, so they ain't thinking race. They thinking, what is the force I'm looking for? How can I get that force? And that force is connected to a kind of power, and that power is multidimensional. That is, that it doesn't operate in one stream. It's complete. And so in that way, I was looking at, okay, they designed this form takes space, and this form articulates itself in a certain way, and it always has an opening, like a form that operates to create a space. And I was taught that negative space was not as important as the positive space, but the African wasn't interested in that kind of shit. So immediately, I started for many years trying to understand that dynamic. And it took my going to Amsterdam and discovering this power in tulips and the history that was connected to it that shaped my sensibility, so that when I understood in my African work, the African forms that I was collecting and dealing with, that this space was what I was really trying to understand. And at the time, I happened to be talking to Oliver about, this is in the 80s, I was talking to Oliver about, and so he gave me this thing to read that Heidegger, and, first of all, I wasn't interested in Heidegger because I heard he was a Nazi. And so I didn't have no, and, Oliver, like Ray, I was looking at them tulips and I was trying to draw them and I was, whoo. And Ray said, man, you can't draw that. Don't try to draw that, man. But I didn't pay attention, so I kept drawing them. And then I said, he's right. And then a whole new world opened up. And when I was in there arguing with Oliver about space and time, we weren't arguing, we was having a conversation. And this idea of absence, whether a form is full or whether a form is empty, and what is creating that condition, that was everything I was reading in African cosmology was already there. All that stuff I was reading in sacred science was there. So this is just another way of looking at something. And so the hoodies, these hoodies, a cloak, you have to, like earlier, Oliver said something about garments, like the way you dress. See, that the dressing, that what you put on yourself is a confrontation. Like those musicians, part of the reason they were so powerful is because they accommodated themselves in space taking. That is, they took space in a certain way. They made their body articulate. That articulation was exactly what I saw in those African sculptures. Hear this lean, this just subtle lean, and then you see Miles break a certain form, or Billy articulate herself against the microphone in a particular way. Those gestures really got to me, and I could see that blackness or black thought can emerge out of the sensibility that you bring to it. You don't need to have a black body. That's a trope that gets set into place to shape the way you move in the world. But them musicians ain't nobody told James Brown to make black music. James Brown, the minute you hear that, now, what else you need? What else you need? Now that's
Don't even need a drum.
Now that is the drum.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Ha, boom. And the Temptations, same thing. Monk, bing. Yeah, that right there is where the sensibility is. So you don't need to have a black body. You don't need to have a black face trapped in time like a Hellenistic Greek form. So right there, I said, okay, I see my son wearing them hoodies just like I used to wear them Ben Davis pants so I could be cool when I was a kid. And here my son got a hoodie on, and he threw it up against the wall, and it looks like a person is in it. I look at it, I said, wait a minute. That's exactly the space that is taking, the form that is taking, the emptiness. What looks like emptiness is actually the point.
The void, yeah.
There you go. And the void is the complete potentiality of space and time, and you have to step in it. And so the hoodies have no time. They have no space. They are an expression of the moment in space and time, and they are one thing, not one, two, or three things. They are one thing, and therefore they could operate in this broader context of my work, which was going to encompass these elements, of which the hoodies is only one expression. And that's why this idea of abstraction is a non-thing, because everything I see up in here is abstract. I'm looking at all them people up in this audience, they all abstractions. None of them, except the individual aspect of their presencing. And we talked about presencing a great deal. But that's what African thought, African cosmology brought to me. And therefore it liberated me. I didn't have to, I painted murals because I wanted to make a statement to black people when I was a kid. But after that, I couldn't make the kind of murals I wanted to make because they wanted me to make black bodies. I'm not making black bodies anymore. I'm making stuff from my shit. I'm not interested in all that other stuff. So that's how that happened.
You know, I wish we would be able to get into both your murals and JoeSam's murals and the response to the absence of Black art within mainstream museums, which I believe was part of the radical response, right? Part of mural making and being commissioned to make murals was also about not being in major museums in that moment. But just to round this out, Oliver, since Dewey has already, teed you up, I want to think. He'll tee it up and then close us out. I want to think about your one specific body of work, which is an early body of work, the Sharpeville series, that for context, for those of you who may not remember, on March 21st in 1960, there was a massacre in South Africa. Police opened fire on an unseated crowd of Black demonstrators who'd marched into Sharpeville's police station to protest that country system of colonial apartheid. 69 people were killed, 180 people were wounded. And this notion of time and space, we've seen things like this happen through 2020. We've seen protests, we've seen people killed, we've seen all of this around racial apartheid, both in the US and South Africa, in London and Paris. And so, can you talk to us about the Sharpeville series, which I believe is 1966 through 77, and how we see that through line in your work today?
What you described, that was happening in South Africa was a mirror of what was happening in the United States, almost exactly the same, The governmental powers asserting their terrorism on a population that they wanted to control for economic reasons. So, one of the things about me using the South African mirror is I could get around Americana. Americana is always taking an event and making sure that it supports the cultural stance of the government. So, that stance in South Africa released me from having to deal with the American icons about race, which is boring, because everyone is confined, as Dewey pointed out, to this rather narrow viewing of an event or a fact or something. See? It's hard to get around that because that's part of my bias too. I'm raised in this country, tended to look at, I hate these things. Can you hear me now? You couldn't hear me before, I have to repeat all that crap? I don't need to repeat. Anyway, so that was very useful. The point for me was this. It is not unique in violent history that events of apartheid and persecution, lynching, terrorism, that's just not new for African people, Jewish people, German people, Irish people. Everybody's gone through it. But the spin, the Americana spin, the justification that you're trained to accept, that Indians create massacres, and we don't. We are innocent, and they are the bad guys. Americana, always setting up this rather simplistic good guys, bad guys, so European Americans who call themselves white can feel innocent of their acts. Now that justification is too much. Everybody's abused everybody else in the world, but that justification, how can you begin to have a dialogue when you are defining how I got to look at the event? See, it's difficult. So to avoid that, being trapped by it, one more example. We're supposed to believe that the Emancipation Proclamation is such a wonderful thing. It's wonderful in one sense only, that we don't have to pick as much cotton. But to take credit for it after that abuse is wrong. It was justice, God damn it. The emancipation should have been from the first day. And we were trained to look at Lincoln as though he was a god who had suddenly saw the light. That was wrong. That was wrong. It wasn't just to start that mythos among black children and white children, the emancipator. Finally, justice, damn it. Finally, somebody fessed up a little bit. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. And I really mean this. That's Americana, damn it, always. That there is white supremacy. The country was started on that. I mean, please. This is not new. It just occurs in waves when everything gets bad here. This shit comes up like, oh. And these European Americans, you call yourselves white. Everybody else is an ethnic thing, but no, y'all white people. The minute you talk to each other, then you're English and Italian ethnic people. See, the game is always afoot in the United States. Always euphemisms to cover up the event, just the straightness of it. We could get somewhere if we could just meet just on straight, no yeast, no hype. What did I learn about Native Americans? I'm spending time with this. We'll get to the Sharpeville thing. I went to school. Every film, school, they're people primitives. They weren't doing anything with the land. What bullshit. I mean, and I'm a kid. That's all I knew. That's Americana. White people feel innocent of their history. Hell, who's innocent of their history? That goes for me. Black people commit Jewish genocide on black people. So shit, can we tell the truth about it? For once, no. No, how the West was one. A few mistakes, my ass. No, think about it. Always being let down easy on acts, all human beings that have terrific acts, cruel acts. Can you take it? You did it. So it's very difficult to deal inside with the events that were going on in the 60s, exactly the same things going on in South Africa, but I had some distance so I didn't fall prey to how I looked at the events, being separated using that circumstance. And one of them was this. We all know the politics involved. They're obvious. Apartheid, United States there. But the result for me was this. Those who were being persecuted in any group, what is the most sad thing for me is the desperateness that people suffer when they're being terrorized. And the example in the United States is we've been terrorized, and I do mean terrorized. I don't want no soft porn about them goddamn lynchings. That's pure terrorism that went on for, that black people being driven out of whole communities. Why are we in the cities? We're driven out. Not kindly, you know. And all this is a myth. You get this Americana like it didn't happen. It's too much. It's just too much. For me, too much. But what is behind it is it's a desperation that takes place. Whenever people are persecuted in this way, any group of people, what you see is a desperation. These people running, there's a desperation. And this is the beginning of course, a rebellion, but it's that desperation that a human being should never be put into. And above all, as a human being, always in this country, being designated by color, or anything but a human being, there's only so much you can take. And that was what really I wanted to get across, is the limit of being terrorized, so that men, women, children, all our big talk about human beings, and what we see is that we terrorize each other. And I'm not talking about soft porn, I'm talking about killing, terrorizing. And so that is rarely expressed in the United States. The terror that takes place in Mississippi, the hose, is terrorism. Dogs turn loose on people. Everybody knows, all Americans know that shit. Soft porn. Soft porn all the time. You got to hear it. It's too much. And so I use that venue because it's so parallel. This one is perfectly obvious. And I could then see in that event, the real horror of it is that you demean and degrade human beings by terrorizing them. Millions of people are now traversing the world trying to escape terrorism. All the talk about this border, and all over the world, people have to move. They have to leave because they're being terrorized. Regardless of your political stance, they're being terrorized. And just babies. Everybody talk about how they love babies, but shit, they shoot them all the time. It's too much. That's all I'm saying. And that's why I use South Africa, because it removed me from Americana, so I could see clearly what is going on to human beings. And we go back to sensibility. It's the most wonderful thing from my perspective in the world that people, and I do mean all people, not talking about some Pollyanna shit. It's the sensibility that's wonderful. It's what you can connect with. It's why I can listen to Chinese music and like it. Just give it some time. That's sensibility. Well, you give anything. I didn't mean you give anything some time. It took me some time for so-called classical music. I'm raised in the black community. We wasn't playing that shit. But when I heard this, I go, damn, this is all right. It's because it's accessible. It's that sensibility.
So
when we talk about the African citizen, just a little bit more African citizen, it's always separated like it's something over here. It's the sensibility in the world. It's the sensibility. Sorry about that.
Had to be in this class.
Oh, and Mildred, how you doing?
you know, we never know when we'll all be able to do this together again. And we never know when we'll be able to have these conversations again. So I am completely in debt to you, Oliver, to you, Dewey, and obviously to you, JoeSam, for the opportunity for us to have this conversation. Obviously, MoAD, Minetta, Kijo, in debt to all of you for being here. To close this out, I want to say a few things. One, please look at Oliver's work and at Dewey's work if you have not seen it recently, because the context he described is very different than what you might see looking at it. So part of the reason why I think conversation around abstraction in particular, if you let me use that word, Dewey, is so important because it's not obvious what the subjects that are being addressed are. This is not figurative work. There is no blood in it. There is no obvious violence in it. So the notion that we are addressing these issues within the work has to be done through either interpretation, conversation, or writing. JoeSam, you're going to have the last word, but this thought around abstraction, which is how we enter. In John Graham's book, Systems and Dialectics of Art, written in 1937, he challenges artists to reestablish a lost contact with the unconscious, actively by producing works of art and passively by contemplating works of art. and to make that long lost contact with the primordial racial past in order to bring to the conscious mind the throbbing events of the unconscious mind. That's what I think this work is doing. Joe's work, Oliver's work, and Dewey's work, and I hope you'll spend time with it and agree. JoeSam, you want to take us out?
Hey, listen, one of the things we omitted a little bit this evening, which is one of the
A
things
lot.
I'm very involved, is women artists. And I could remember back in the day before Mildred, made an imprint on that particular fact. I never paid attention to that until I was somewhere, and I remember I never saw the sisters or any women take it on themselves to initiate these things that we were talking about tonight. Not like they weren't trying or deal with it, but I was blown away. And one night, I don't know, I was in Paris, and I remember, Dewey, you remember coming to the door, and someone at the party that we were having decided that they couldn't come because of the attitude, these two women. And it was Faith Rango and this other sister. And Faith, and somebody knocked on the door, we're partying in there. And I remember opening the door, and I never met Faith before. And she had this other sister who was a runner. Oh man, she was something too. And I remember somebody yelled, "Well, don't let them in here. They can't come in this party." I thought I was here in Twilight Zone. And I turned around, and he had said, he had a fight with one of them, I guess. And I'll never forget, Mildred, she wasn't there in that situation, but Mildred, what's her name? Faith Rango said, "I'll come to any goddamn party I want to." I said, "Oh, that's my aunt right there." and then this other sister, I can't think of her name, she was rough and ready. And they pushed the door. I wasn't going to stand in the way, but they pushed the door wide open. They said, "We're going to party in here with everybody else." Not only that, give me a glass of wine. And I fell out. And then subsequently, these women moved on to be something. Powerhouses. And what was the other one? They were like two partners. She pushed the door open. See, we told I ain't coming in this party. And I mean, oh man, this sister was, she reminds me of Harlem. I'll never forget. I'm crazy about Faith Rango. She was really something.
Ooh, we're making a movie, JoeSam. We're making a movie.
Joe,
Who was the woman, Dewey?
the whole thing.
Well, you were right there standing behind me.
Yeah, I filmed.
Throw us down the window.
I filmed.
Coming back to get the rest of my
And
archives.
it was.
No, she's well known.
It was Adrian Piper.
Dad.
It was
It wasn't
Sam Gilliam. It was Mary. We had just left Mary's house, but
We were.
all of those artists, about 20.
Yeah.
And you're right. It was a great moment.
Yeah.
It was a great moment. Oh, and John Scott made some great salmon.
Yeah.
We're
And
thinking sculptures.
it was absolutely crazy.
Beautiful.
We were over the Seine. The Ray's apartment was overlooking the Seine, and we was getting drunk right out there, and singing to the moon over Notre Dame. So it was out shit.
And she said, "What? I'm coming to this party. I know all these niggas in here. Let's go." Snap. I love it. She was something, Faith Rango, and her partner. I can't think of that woman name. She's well known though. I've seen her give a talk at the Wadsworth Museum. I forgot. But anyway, Dewey,
I'm sorry.
you two guys take a minute and give Mildred a kiss for me, will you?
Yeah, easily.
I want to say one thing. Charlie Parker. I just want to.
There you go.
And just so everybody knows, there will be an exhibition coming up that looks at all of these Paris moments and the artists of African descent
Yes, sir.
who
Buddy.
were all
We all got
simultaneous
fun of
there.
that.
It's coming up. So there you
We
go.
all got
Thank
fun.
you guys so much for being with us. We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Much love to you. Great job.